Hello everyone, MasterZeon101 here, and in this update log we'll be talking about HardOps 987.9 and some of the changes that come to it besides Blender 3.0 compatibility. One of the main additions to note is the addition of map scroll that's been added to Alt-M. However, in order to use it, you'll have to specify a path to texture maps. In order to provide some texture maps for this particular update, I've done a collaboration with Travis Davids, who has a promotion under the Q menu in Link Ops, where you can basically use an operative link to receive 150 tolerable roughness maps at a discount, which will assist with using this particular feature. So with that in mind, if we press Ctrl K, we can go under the HardOps properties, and under the paths area, let's just paste in the link to our paths. And with that, we now are able to use map scroll, and once activated, it'll basically convert your material over to the system. And once you begin rolling your wheel, you'll be able to begin scrolling through various types of maps that are present. One of my favorite things about this is being able to press E in order to choose a random one out of all the maps that are present, which can give some really interesting results. A lot of the time I just like to look at random roughness maps. In fact, holding Control Shift will allow you to begin scrubbing through the normal channel as well, choosing to increase or decrease its intensity, and you're even able to take it in reverse. So just like that, I've quickly materialized this object with a little bit of grunge just in the 3D view without having to do a whole lot of work, and that's really the focal point of this update. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into HardOps 987.9. First and foremost, we've now increased our compatibility to now be compatible with Blender 3.0, which basically is almost the same as Blender 2.93 at this time. However, it is a little bit less stable than we're generally used to, so do keep in mind that and use it with caution. So first thing I'm going to do is jump into my preferences, and under add-ons, we're just going to install these add-ons. So first we'll just knock Boxcutter out, which is now compatible with 3.0 as of version 718_5, and then HardOps 987_9 is also now compatible with Blender 3.0. So now that we have that set up, let's go under our navigation and turn off auto perspective, and under system we want to choose about 30 recent files, lower our autosave timer, and maybe enable CUDA for some cycles action. We can save our preferences, and with the cube selected, I'll press Ctrl I to delete everything that is not the cube, and then I can press Alt V while locked in at this angle and just set it to EVHQ in the Alt V submenu. And for me, I like to start up Blender with Boxcutter already enabled, so we'll just save user preferences. And with that, we're now ready to rock and roll. So we can just get in quickly, just click and drag to begin box cutting without any further delay. And that's really as good as it gets. And then of course we could press Q, go into HardOps, start adding bevels, weighted normal, Alt M for blank material, Alt V to begin looking through various look dev environments, reselecting the object and control clicking blank material, just so we could scroll through endless combinations of potential materials that we could be slapping on this object. And just like that, we now have Blender and Boxcutter installed and set up for Blender 3.0. So in this example, we could see that I have a cube that's being animated through a series of drivers that are placed on some geometry nodes, and pretty much it's just a mirror in a geometry node stack. Previously with HardOps, issues would happen with sort whenever it came to performing booleans with a mesh such as this. I just wanted to demonstrate that as of this update, we can now insert cubes, select both objects, press Q, go under something like say intersect, and we're able to intersect and keep the modifier nodes intact. So just letting you know that while there are no UI options added to sort like one would expect when we're talking about adding support to sort, sort is something that will deal with geometry nodes inherently and aim to not move them. Whenever a model has modifiers on it, pressing Q will offer Everscroll inside of the main menu. Everscroll offers a variety of ways to scroll through various troubleshooters on your mesh. Just general clicking will take you through boolean, shift clicking will take you through modifiers, control clicking will take you through child objects, and alt clicking it will simply perform a smart apply. So if we left click it, we can see that I'm able to begin scrolling through the particular booleans that comprise this mesh. In fact, I'm even able to press A in order to choose which ones I want to keep appended to the selection after this. If I were to want to make fine edits like this one, I could select, go in and adjust the amount of bevel after the fact. So it's just a quick way to just grabbing your booleans if needed, in addition to, of course, being able to go in Hops tool and just hold Control and roll over the dots until you find the particular object that you want to bring back and then click. So there's always more ways than one in order to perform the operation that you're intending to do. However, Everscroll also has modifier scroll, where you can begin scrolling through it just by shift clicking Everscroll. It'll allow you to begin scrolling through modifier scroll. One of the cool things about modifier scroll is that if you were to disable the render visibility of one of the particular modifiers, it actually omits it from being terminated before the scroll. So now you see I'm able to scroll through it and they're showing up with symmetry. So sometimes if I'm trying to just make a very good scroll, I want certain modifiers to just be overridden. So sometimes I'll just override them for just a moment and then of course turn them back on. But one of the other features that was a new addition to Everscroll is the ability to auto scroll. So if we jump into modifier scroll, we can press shift space and that will allow you to begin basically auto scrolling, and rolling the wheel up and down will change your interval time between the cuts. So now I have the lowest possible interval time, just allowing these cuts to really just flow in there. In fact, I'll select another piece and we'll just run a auto scroll on that as well. Just let it scroll in. And one of the interesting things about Everscroll at this time is that if you press tab, it jumps into an expanded mode. One of the first things we want to do for this particular update is add a play button, so users could actually go in expanded mode and just click on the play button. So just to kind of recap on this is that you can access Everscroll from the main menu, but this also exists as part of operations under modifier scroll. So if you just come to operations and click on modifier scroll, it will open into an expanded version of modifier scroll where you can do all sorts of things. I mean, right now I'm just showing how you can go through and use auto scroll. However, we can also expand the help and see what sort of options we have. And the fact that these change colors whenever we highlight over them means that we can actually click them. So I can click the hotkey of auto scroll and actually stop the scroll. And I could even just continue scrolling through this manually. In fact, I'm going to scroll till I get to the point that I want. Another interesting thing about Everscroll using it in this expanded mode is that with these checkboxes, you can apply very particular modifiers, but shift clicking will apply all the modifiers leading up to that modifier. So if I want to apply from here to here, all I have to do is just shift click on this arrow and every modifier is applied except for the last two that you see me scrolling through here. So if we right click, we cancel all that applying we just talked about, but just letting you know that there's now a play button inside of the expanded mode of modifier scroll Everscroll. So with this file, notice on the side that I'm in collection 1, and there's another collection, collection 2, that has my cutters, and then there's collection 3 that contains inserts. Whenever you add an insert using KitOps, it actually gets placed into the inserts collection of KitOps. This isn't anything against KitOps, it's just the way that KitOps works. However, if I were to press 1, I would be isolated collection 1, collection 2, and then collection 3. So in order to work this way, I have to press 1, and then I press 3, and then I have collection 1 and 3 enabled at the same time. Normally in HardOps, I would use something called unify in order to make everything come to the same collection. So now everything's actually unified to the same collection. However, let's actually undo that and set it up back the way that it was, because the situation at hand is that if we were to go into Everscroll and we begin scrolling through booleans, we see that we're able to scroll our booleans. However, the solid objects of this layer that are not part of this collection are gone. And this is something that can be a little bit daunting and also confusing to new users. It's a bit of an oversight on our part, and I'm happy to announce that it's finally been resolved. If I right click and cancel it, we see that we're back to where we were with our standard visibility. But even with modifier scroll, notice that basically the solid object from the other collection disappears, and this is something that we didn't want happening. So if we minimize this, we're now back into the 3.0 version of Blender using the latest version of HardOps. And if we jump into Everscroll, we see that we're able to scroll through booleans now, and the solid objects no longer disappear. In fact, the same thing goes with modifier scroll. We go through modifier scroll, we see that the solid objects remain. And basically this means that we could use something like auto scroll along with modifier scroll, and solid objects from KitOps inserts don't disappear, and we don't have to worry about their visibility being triggered off. So I apologize for anyone that this may have affected, but I'm happy to announce that now Everscroll will keep solid objects visible. So before I even do this demonstration, I can already tell you that just showing array and having the dialog for array interfere with my key display is going to be something that gets on my nerves. So for that reason, I'm going to press Control K, go under display options, or not display options, fast UI options, and locate the mod offset. And we're just going to set this to 120. And let's just press Q and try it again. We need a little bit more. Let's try 260. Really just doubling those numbers. And that's a little high. We'll press Control K again. Maybe 200 will do for this demonstration. And that's actually more like it. So, you know, I hate it when my UI clashes with UI overlays from Windows, but just wanted to show myself fixing that for just a moment before we begin. So sorry about that. We'll save those preferences because we don't want to deal with that the next time. And with that, let's begin. So when it comes to array in HardOps, you can locate array by pressing Q and going under add modifiers. There's an array v2, which is the default right now. We can see in the tooltip that control clicking it allows you to add a second array, which was something that for some reason we didn't have on array v2. However, we have it on every single one of our other tools. Just control clicking any of these options will simply add an additional modifier on top of the one that you already have. So just letting you know that adding control for a new array on top of array v2 is just boilerplate. So if we click this, we see that we're able to just quickly jump into array, and you see that I'm in a mode called 2D, which means when I roll the wheel, it's actually appending it to my count versus me pressing V and using 3D mode, and when I roll the wheel, it actually puts the count in between, which is my favorite way to array. Another thing about using array is that you can press A while using array in order to add another array. So we just added another array on top of our first array, and we can even press A and add another array. And let's just change this to 3D mode. Maybe press tab, zoom out, then press V, and here we are performing our array. So it gets a little weird if you're too zoomed in, but here we are setting up our three-dimensional array, and that's me actually setting up an array on the fly inside the same array operation. But let's remove these modifiers and just take it back to the beginning. So basically, if you press Q, in your Q menu, if you have an unmodified mesh like you see here, array v2 will show up as an option. However, before you even use array, you can actually configure array to be however you want it to be. So right now I'm using array v2, and it starts me out in 2D mode. As part of my opt-ins, I actually want to opt in to being in 3D, and also want my auto T panel, so the T panel goes away. And so if we press Q and we go under array v2, we now see that we're inside array, but we're in 3D mode. So I'll press X to change my axis, and we see that this is now the way that array starts. So the moment I'm in array, it's actually tracking to my cursor, where I can now specify how many of these that I want in between. So after clicking and applying this operation, I can then go back in and control click array again to add a second array as a second operation. So similar to how I was showing the first time, I'm just showing the amount of versatility that we try to give users with setting up arrays, setting them up, stacking them up on the fly, stacking them up on the secondary, coming back and stacking up these arrays later. In fact, we can go ahead and just bevel this, and then from here control click array to add a third array. It doesn't matter what order our modifier stacks in, we'll just be adding these as we need them. And I'm just really just trying to establish some of the foundations with how array works inside of HardOps on a basic level when it comes to using it as a fast system, compared to, say, using it as a expanded system where you press tab to pause it and you expand the UI, and you actually use the UI to perform your configurational changes whenever it comes to array. This is something that's new, but just, you know, as a recap, it does support numeric entry. So if I want to go in and specifically type a number, I can. If I wanted to lower the array that I'm currently adjusting, right now I'm on 3, I can roll the wheel. You see I've jumped to array 2 in the stack, where I can now begin adjusting that one. I can go to this thing, roll it again. Now I'm on array 1. I can begin rolling the wheel to actually adjust this one individually in the stack. So this is something that's new, is us adding the ability for users to go in and specify which particular modifier they're adjusting. So there's things that we're still trying with the .ui, just really trying to nail all the pieces in place as far as what we want it to be before we begin taking it forward in a dramatic way. But just letting you know that there has been a plethora of improvements with array, and you know, this is just a basic overview. But just to cover some of the things that have changed in this particular update when it comes to array v2 is right now I'm performing an array. If I wanted to set this to 1, I can just press 1, and that will actually set all the array values to 1, basically stacking all of these on top of each other. So sometimes you actually want to go into array and just sequentially lay everything on top of each other without any gaps in between. In any event that you actually have it the wrong way, you can of course either press F to pause it, and then press Shift 1 in order to put it to the opposite of 1. I actually see that we probably need to add F to flip, just like Boxcutter. But basically pressing 1 will put it to 1, and Shift 1 will put it to -1. And this is good and all, but sometimes you also want to be able to set to 0. So we also add the ability for users to press 0 to set a rate of 0 in the event that you're using it in an even stranger fashion. Sometimes it may come up where you want to zero out the axis that you're currently adjusting, and just letting you know that pressing 0 will let you do that. And this is just a couple of the improvements that we have going on with this array in this particular version, but we do have much more planned when it comes to using it. Of course, keep in mind that anytime that you get confused on your axis, you could press G, and that will activate graphic. Holding Alt will let you change which axial direction that you're changing. Just tapping Alt and moving your mouse will let you guide the gizmo in a way. And with that, you can quickly change your axis. So we've done a lot to actually try to make this the best possible array, and we're still not done yet. But with that, we can move on to the next slide. Link ops can be located in Settings inside the Q menu. So if we press Q, go to Settings, there's Link ops, and by clicking it, it'll bring up a series of banners that by clicking them will take you to various hyperlinks connected to various things in the community, be it a playlist of videos, different people's YouTube channels, even products that are recommended to users that could possibly help them in their experience. But the thing that we'll be focusing on today will be this one, as soon as I get to it. 150 tolerable roughness maps. This was prepared by Travis Davids, who I'll be talking about in the next slide, and by clicking this it'll take you to an exclusive operative link that will give you a discount on the product. This link is only valid for the first 100 or so people that use it, so it's definitely a timed offer. However, it's something that I set up in collaboration with them as a promotion for a tool that we made inside of HardOps that actually is enhanced by these particular tolerable roughness maps. And for that note, whenever it comes to HardOps and getting around the community, by clicking the Hops button, there's also a drop down that'll take you to a list of links as well. Clicking these will take you to various places throughout the community that may assist you in your adventures, as well as the Discord group and the Facebook group, which is where we try to keep up with our operatives and connect to them on a daily basis. But just keep in mind that by pressing Q and going to Link Hops, you can actually just use the arrow keys in order to change the slide and just look at any of the various banners that will take you to various systems that are interconnected throughout the HardOps community. When it comes to HardOps and getting acquainted with it, bringing down the Hops button in the corner of the 3D view and clicking on this Q button will actually display all the hotkeys that are pertinent to your HardOps experience. The area we'll be talking about today will be the Alt-M material list that's listed here. By pressing Alt-M, we can actually display a material list of all the materials that are present in our scene. Because we only have one material, that's what's listed here. But if we had multiple materials, clicking on a material would actually assign it to this particular object. In the event that you do not have a material, you do have the ability to have one automatically assigned for you. If we hover over this and look at the tooltip, we see that we can control click this to have a unique material per object. We can shift click it to have a glass material. We can even alt click it to have a pulsing emissive material driven by a driver on this object. If we look at material scroll, we see that just generally clicking it just allows us to scroll through the materials that are present in our scene, but control clicking it allows us to do a blank material scroll where it generates a random material per every scroll. The interesting thing about material scroll is the shift click behavior, where basically shift clicking will allow you to scroll through materials without replacing the material index itself, but just replacing the nodes inside of it. In this version, new is something called map scroll, which basically will allow you to scroll through texture maps that you have preordained in a directory inside of your prefs. But just to go over blank material in a nutshell, just by clicking it, we can assign a blank material. We'll press Q and we'll give this a sphere cast, and let's shift A, add a plane, and press GZ1, and we see that it just didn't make it to be below our object. So my favorite way to insert things is pressing Q, O, T, pressing spacebar, choosing plane, and then control rolling the wheel in order to place it precisely below, and then just S and 50, and we'll assign that a blank material as well. Let's just press Alt VV in order to set this to a particular look dev environment that we want. And so just like that, we've materialized and got our scene ready for presentation. And we could even take a step further by pressing Alt VB and just rolling through blank light setups until we find a light scenario that we like, and then just drop it there. However, continuing on, If we wanted to just begin scrolling through endless materials, we can do that through blank material scroll, and it will just continuously give you just random materials of just random roughness and metallicity values, metallicity being either 0 or 1 and roughness being any value in between 0 and 1, just to give you just different variations of roughness, color, gradients of gray, and basically any combination you could get within those parameters. You could also press C to begin just scrolling through color, and you could even press T to begin changing the type of material that you're scrolling through. So now I'm scrolling through car paint, now I'm scrolling through various emission materials, and now I'm back to scrolling through different principal shaders. And I can even press T and go back to scrolling through different types of materials again. However, that's not what I meant to do. I meant to press C and actually begin scrolling through just shades of gray materials all over again. But just like that, you can generate random materials on the fly. However, one of the things you might notice looking at this is that everything's just too perfect, and that's where map scroll comes in for this particular update. So hypothetically, if I were materializing this, I would enable visibility, I would hide the glass part, I would select everything and just assign a blank material. And then I would just select one piece, and if I shift click material scroll, I can actually scroll through combinations of various materials. In fact, I'll press O in order to change it over to look dev. And as I'm scrolling through, I can just choose the various types of blank materials until I find one that I like as what I need. And then I could select individual elements and give them blank materials as well. In fact, I'll Alt-H unhide just to reveal everything. However, if we press Alt-M with something selected, we see that there's a new option here called Map Scroll, and it specifies that basically if there's no path specified in the press for it to be used, that it won't be able to be used. So if we press Ctrl-K, we can actually bring up our preference, and under the Properties tab of HardOps under Properties, if we expand this, we see that we have a Maps area where we can specify the map that we would like to use with this particular aspect of HardOps. So we'll just paste in a directory that I have pointing to some noise maps that were made by Travis Davids. And if we go back to our Alt-M menu, we see that Map Scroll is now an option. So if I click it, we see that the material is transferred over to the Map Scroll system. In fact, if we right click and cancel, we see that the material actually looks a little different whenever you first jump into Map Scroll. And that is because if we expand the .ui, we can see that we're actually blending between two different values, the original value and the value that is to be added in. So let's just right click, cancel, and let's reapproach it again. So basically, if you jump into Map Scroll, in this mode without a UI showing, just rolling the wheel will allow you to scroll through the different types of noise textures that you have populating in your directory, and it'll load them one by one, and there's a filtration system to ensure that you're not loading, say, thumbnails of how it is intended to be presented, and you can just continually scroll through them. And one of my favorite things about this is you can press E, and E will actually let you choose a random noise file. So I'm just choosing one of these random noise textures, and by holding Control Shift I can begin adding bump to this. The moment you use Control Shift, you are then adding bump. So we'll just put a subtle bump, and then from there press E to jump to the next map until we find the result that we want. In the event that we want to scale this, we can of course press S and move the mouse to adjust our scale, pressing S to end that particular operation. We could even press G in order to translate, which can get a little bit wacky because it's dealing with box mapping and nodes. But in addition to that, you could also use things like Shift and Alt in order to adjust the brightness. So here I'm holding Alt in order to adjust the contrast of the map that's being blended into the roughness of the blank material. As of right now, the system only supports the principal shader based blank material, so it doesn't support emission, glass, or car paint just yet. But let's just right click and set this up again. So I'm going to just select just one random element because they all share the same material. And if we shift click material scroll, we can just scroll through replacing the nodes that are inside with the ones that we're generating. And they're just basically random iterations of the material. So there's nothing to really think about there. So now that we have something that we like, we can then jump into Map Scroll and just begin rolling the wheel to begin mixing in different types of maps. And there's a lot more to it than just this. I'm really only skimming the surface. More than likely I'll be coming back to do a dedicated video talking about this more in depth. But if we were to press tab, we can see that we can toggle which channels that we're interacting with whenever it comes to the texture that's chosen. We can use this little folder loader to choose which texture that we're loading, and even this one to go back to our various directories, and even click home to go back to the original directory that's specified in our preferences. When it comes to dealing with the roughness, you can choose how much of the roughness you have as your initial value that's being blended into the noise that's being provided, or you can actually choose what that initial roughness value is. You can also change the blend mode in the event that you're one of those type of people and want to deal with your blend mode. But before all of that, you can deal with the contrast and brightness that's being given to this. Once I click, I'll show an example of what the node graph looks like. It's fairly simple, but one of the interesting things is if we hover over this, we see a tooltip saying that shift clicking will show us the channel. So at this point, we're able to now view the channel, and we can just scroll in what we're wanting because there's a viewer node connected, and more meticulously deal with this on an intimate level. And then of course, shift clicking it will allow us to go back, and we can continue to modify our values even while looking at the material result. And then of course, just clicking will allow us to keep it. So let's just take a moment and jump over to shading. And with shading up, we can now see the node setup that's created. So because we only operated on roughness, we just have our image connected to a UV coming out to a mapping that's then getting box blended, color ramp, brightness contrasted, and then plugged into roughness that's dialing between the initial value and the value that we are presenting to it through this combination. So it's really basic, but the goal is for us to be able to deal with this sort of stuff without having to go into the node editor. Nothing against the node editor, but changing my viewports is always something that I find a little bit jarring, especially because my goal is to work 100% in full screen mode without even having to use the properties panel on the side. So here I am going back into map scroll to scroll through these values to find the perfect map. Another thing I want to mention about map scroll is that if you press Q, you can go under settings, and there's an option for link ops where you can actually go to the second link, which is 150 tolerable roughness maps, which is an operative link exclusive to this update that is part of a promotion that I'm doing in collaboration with Travis Davids, who is an illustrious 3D artist from South Africa who just happened to have made a very nice set of roughness maps that cater to our needs. Currently, map scroll is exclusive to the behavior of roughness, but in the future we'll be expanding to dealing with independent channels on a more intimate level and making something that's a little bit more nimble for texturizing in the 3D view without a whole lot of preparation and guesswork. But this is just the first step, and I'm quite proud of this, even though it is something that we put together just over the course of a month. Full shout out to ST3 because he was the person behind all of it, but the idea started off as some sort of filtration system for loading images and actually discarding junk while being able to quickly set up these little node graphs. So right now it starts out fairly simple, but in the future I do imagine that its purpose will change and become a little bit more evolved, and you'll be dealing with independent channels. But as of right now, you are currently only dealing with a single channel when it comes to one texture. Even in the documentation of the grunge for these textures, Travis actually mentions that using different types of roughness compared to normals can give some interesting results. So that's something that he even mentioned that I failed to neglect to get put into this version, but it is something that we will be pondering for the next one. But being able to shift click these and see the outputs in the 3D view is something that was added a little bit last minute, but I'm proud of the fact that it was able to be added because it is so essential. But I hope users end up trying out the promotion, picking up some maps, building up a prefabs folder of roughness maps that they can scroll through and just experiment with the system to see what sort of interesting results they're able to get using the basic principle shader and the blank material system within HardOps. Recently, I was so fortunate as to get to work on the recent Hops ad, so in the process of doing it, I found myself needing some imperfection textures in order to spruce up the blank materials that were being used for the surfaces that you see here. This is a little bit of behind the scenes of just how the blends were going when it came to cutting these patterns. And then of course the camera will change over to an upper view showing the pieces fall down. But really, as I looked at it over and over and tweaked it repeatedly, I just felt that something else was needed in order to get this looking right. In fact, looking at this in retrospect, I remember actually hand animating all these pieces to go down and slide in, knowing that I was going to give them clicks later like you see in the intro. But even after setting all this up, I felt that something else was needed with this. So for that, that's where these imperfection maps came in. So if you look at the final result, which looks a little weird unless I zoom in, just kind of a weird bug with Eevee. If I zoom back, it looks all blown out, but if I zoom in, it's fine. You know, that's Blender for you. But you know, if we go through and we look at this, it actually just has a little bit more character to it. I'm sure I could have used it even more efficiently now with the upcoming feature that I'll be discussing, but just wanted to show a little background of how these maps came into my life. And so as a result, I wanted to come up with some sort of system that would be able to utilize it. And it was initially quite difficult to explain to ST3 internally as far as what I was wanting, because he was like, you want to do what? I was like, yeah, I want a system that scrolls through these maps, but I don't want it to show any garbage maps. I don't want it to load any low resolution thumbnail images in here or try to go through any of the trash. I want it to just bring up only the good stuff. And so with that, let's jump on to the next slide.